The HOA president taped a violation notice to my door right after snooping through my windows like she was scouting for a SWAT raid. Something about unauthorized wood stain and neighborhood cohesion. Drop a comment if your HOA loves buzzwords like compliance but skips over basic decency. I kept calm, at first. But when they treated my cabin like a threat to society, I started reading, deep into public land records, and what I found? Let's just say their beloved clubhouse sits on shakier ground than they thought. I didn't yell, I didn't sue, I just posted a few signs of my own, and after that, nobody walked past that building without stopping to read. Some folks hang wreaths on doors, I hung legal truth on their walls. It all started 6 months ago, when I moved into what I thought would be my dream escape, a quiet lakefront cabin in Pine Valley Estates. After a rough divorce, I just needed peace, and this place seemed perfect. I work remotely in cybersecurity, mostly government stuff. The cabin was old but solid, right on the edge of the HOA boundary. I fixed it up myself and finally had a space that felt like mine. Safe, quiet, until it wasn't. That peaceful existence lasted exactly 97 days. On a Tuesday morning in October, while I was sipping coffee and reviewing some classified network vulnerabilities, I heard someone banging on my front door like they were conducting a police raid. Standing there was Marla Jennings, mid-30s, overdressed like a 90s soap opera extra, bleach blonde hair piled high and enough fake gold to set off an airport scanner. She looked like she came to sell judgment, not cookies. "I'm Marla Jennings, president of the Pine Valley Estates Homeowners Association," she announced, pushing past me into my cabin without invitation. "I'm here to conduct a compliance inspection of your property." She walked around my living room like a tax auditor, making disapproving clicking sounds with her tongue while scribbling notes on her clipboard. She criticized everything from my coffee table placement to the way I'd arranged my work monitors. But what really got her fired up was the cabin's natural wood exterior. "This color scheme is completely inappropriate for our community aesthetic," she declared, pointing at my beautifully restored cedar siding like it was covered in graffiti. I politely explained that I'd done my homework before buying the place. I'd even hired a real estate attorney to review all the HOA regulations, and my cabin qualified as a heritage property, which meant it was exempt from the standard color requirements. I showed her the documentation, the permits, even the original architectural drawings from 1973. But Marla just stared at me with those cold blue eyes, and I could see something darker than mere rule enforcement brewing behind them. There was genuine envy there, especially when she looked around at my beautifully restored interior and that $1 million lake view. "We'll see about that," she said with a smile that made my skin crawl. "Rules are rules, and everyone in Pine Valley Estates follows the same standards, no exceptions." As she strutted toward the door, her cheap jewelry jangling with each step, she turned back with that same predatory smile. "I'll be in touch very soon about your compliance issues." The way she said compliance made it sound like a threat, and honestly, that's exactly what it was. That evening, I tried to shake off the weird encounter by focusing on work, but something about Marla's visit left me unsettled. I'd dealt with plenty of difficult people in government work, but there was something particularly vindictive about her attitude. Around 10 p.m., my laptop chimed with a new email. The subject line made my blood run cold. Pine Valley States. Notice of violation, immediate action required. The message was written in all caps, like someone was screaming at me through the computer screen. It demanded that I repaint my entire cabin white within 10 days or face fines of $500 per day until compliance was achieved. I sat there staring at the email with my coffee growing cold, realizing that my peaceful cabin retreat had just become ground zero for what was clearly going to be a very ugly war. The thing is, when you spend your days protecting government systems from sophisticated attacks, you develop a certain mindset about dealing with threats. And Marla Jennings had just made herself a very serious threat to my peace of mind. Little did she know, she'd just picked a fight with someone who knew exactly how to research, document, and systematically dismantle an enemy's entire operation. I went through the HOA documents like I was dissecting malware. 47 pages of contradictions, sketchy rule changes, and stuff no one ever voted on. Honestly, I've seen cleaner code in Russian ransomware. Most importantly, I confirmed that my cabin was indeed classified as a heritage property, which gave me exemptions from at least 60% of their arbitrary regulations. But here's where it got really interesting. I discovered that Marla had modified the HOA rules 3 times in the past year, each time without the required community approval. She'd essentially been making up regulations as she went along, targeting specific properties that caught her attention. I ran a few background scans using tools from my cybersecurity days. Then I saw it. 3 families, pushed out in under 2 years, each one slammed with bogus violations until they caved. Their homes, snatched up cheap by investors tied to HOA board members. That's not coincidence, that's a pattern, and a nasty one. Walking into that first HOA meeting felt like stepping into a courtroom run by the villain from every bad TV drama. Marla sat up front like she was queen of suburbia, backed by a board that nodded whenever she breathed. I came prepared with my documentation organized in a professional presentation folder, ready to make my case using the same clear, logical approach that had served me well in government briefings. But it became obvious within minutes that this wasn't going to be a rational discussion about property rights and regulations. When I stood up to present my evidence about the heritage property exemption, Marla cut me off before I could even open my folder. "Mr. Reynolds," she said with fake sweetness that dripped like poison, "rules are rules in Pine Valley Estates. We don't make exceptions based on technicalities or loopholes. Your cabin disrupts the harmony and aesthetic standards that make our community special." The 4 board members nodded in unison like bobblehead dolls, and I realized I was looking at a rigged system designed to rubber stamp whatever Marla wanted. That's when things escalated beyond anything I could have anticipated. Marla's assistant, a nervous-looking woman named Elise Newman, stood up and began reading from a prepared list of additional violations that had allegedly been discovered during routine monitoring of my property. According to their new findings, my trees were too tall, my gravel driveway violated paving requirements, my windows were the wrong size, and my mailbox was positioned 3 inches outside the approved zone. Each violation carried a $300 fine, bringing my total penalty to over $4,000, which was suspiciously close to the amount I had in my savings account. After the meeting ended and the other residents filed out, I sat in my car feeling like I'd just been mugged by a group of suburban pirates. That's when an older gentleman approached my window and motioned for me to roll it down. "Name's Walter Graham," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. "Retired real estate attorney. Used to be on the HOA board until I got sick of Marla's games and quit. You need to know what you're really dealing with here." Walter explained that Marla had used these exact same tactics to drive out the 3 previous families, and each time she'd profited from the chaos through various kickback schemes with local investors. But the real bombshell? The Clubhouse, the heart of their little empire, was built illegally on public land. No permits, no approval, just arrogance wrapped in brick and fake colonial charm. That Clubhouse, Walter leaned in, built illegally on public easement, no permits. Worse, she funneled HOA funds into her own home, calling them Clubhouse upgrades. 18 grand at least. Walter handed me a business card with his personal cell number written on the back. "If you're planning to fight this, you're going to need all the help you can get. And son, you better be prepared for war, because Marla doesn't just win battles. She annihilates her enemies." Driving home that night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to just defend myself against Marla's attacks. I was going to go on the offensive and expose the entire corrupt system she'd built. The quiet guy who just wanted to drink coffee in peace was about to show Pine Valley Estates what a cybersecurity expert could accomplish when pushed too far. But first, I had to survive what Marla was planning to throw at me next, and something told me she was just getting started with her campaign of intimidation. The lens glared at me like an unblinking eye. Beneath it stood Marla, clipboard clutched like a scepter, smile stretched too wide. Across the street, curtains twitched. The whole neighborhood was watching, and they weren't blinking either. Next to it hung a bright yellow sign that read, "HOA compliments, monitoring, authorized services," in bold black letters that could be seen from 3 blocks away. Standing beneath the camera with her trusty clipboard was Marla herself, flanked by 2 neighbor women who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else on earth than participating in this bizarre theater of intimidation. "Good morning, Clayton," Marla called out cheerfully, waving at me like we were old friends instead of sworn enemies. "Just documenting some ongoing compliance issues for our legal documentation. Nothing personal." She made a big show of writing notes on her clipboard while loudly discussing my violations with her reluctant assistants. It was theater. Suburban humiliation in high definition. And yeah, I'll admit it stung. No one likes being the morning entertainment for people walking their dogs. Cars slowed down as they passed my place, neighbors walking their dogs stared openly, and I could see curtains twitching in windows all along the street. That morning, something snapped. I wasn't just tired, I was done. I'd spent years tracking cyber criminals across continents. If Marla wanted a war, she just picked the wrong guy to mess with. If Marla wanted to play psychological warfare games, she'd pick the wrong target. I spent most of my professional life thinking 3 steps ahead of hackers and foreign intelligence operatives. A suburban HOA dictator with a clipboard was barely going to register as a challenge. I called Walter Graham that afternoon and arranged to meet him at a coffee shop in the next town over. He showed up with a manila folder full of documents that painted an even more disturbing picture of Marla's operations. She's not just stealing money and harassing residents, Walter explained, spreading papers across our table. She's been systematically targeting the most valuable properties in the development, using manufactured violations to force sales, then making sure those houses go to specific buyers who kick back part of their profits to her network. It's basically a real estate manipulation scheme disguised as HOA enforcement. The evidence Walter had collected was impressive, but I knew it wasn't enough to bring down someone as entrenched as Marla. We didn't just need proof, we needed a nuke. Something so obvious, so damning, that even Marla's fan club would have to drop their pom-poms. That's when Walter mentioned the Clubhouse situation again. The building sits on public easement land, which means any citizen has the legal right to access that property for legitimate purposes. And posting factual information about zoning violations would definitely qualify as a legitimate public service. I spent the next 2 days researching everything I could find about freedom of speech laws, public property rights, and HOA regulations. My government security clearance gave me access to legal databases that most people never see, and what I discovered was fascinating. Not only did I have the right to post factual information on public property, but I also had grounds for filing counter-complaints about the illegal surveillance camera, the harassment campaign, and the misuse of HOA funds. More importantly, I found precedent cases where corrupt HOA officials had faced serious criminal charges for the exact same behaviors Marla was exhibiting. By Friday evening, I had my battle plan ready. I didn't go to Staples, I went full Pentagon. Bold letters, legal quotes, government-grade signs that screamed, "You messed with the wrong nerd." The main sign would read, "HOA is a trespasser built on public land with permits," with a smaller subtitle directing people to contact the county office for verification. I also prepared backup signs about citizen rights to access public property, HOA fund misappropriation, and illegal surveillance activities. Everything was factual, everything was legal, and everything was designed to turn Marla's own tactics against her. While I was preparing for my counterattack, Marla was escalating her harassment campaign to new levels of intensity. She wasn't just sending threatening emails anymore. She was calling me at 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. with urgent compliance reminders. She'd started filing anonymous reports with the county about non-existent noise violations, imaginary fire hazards from my perfectly legal wood stove, and completely fabricated health department concerns. But what she didn't realize was that I could trace every single one of those calls and reports back to her phone number and IP address using the same techniques I use to track cyber criminals. The night before I planned to deploy my signs, I got a call from Elise Newman. Her voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand her. "Clayton, I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "Marla made me forge documents, create fake violation reports, even alter financial records to hide where the money went. I kept copies of everything because I was scared she'd try to blame me if anyone found out. I want to help you stop her, but I'm terrified of what she'll do to me." When I hung up the phone, I just sat there, hands still, coffee untouched. For a full hour, I didn't think about strategy or evidence. I thought about moving. Just leaving. I'd spent my career standing against cyber threats, but here I was, under siege by someone with a clipboard and a grudge, and it was working. She'd made me feel powerless in my own home. That scared me more than any breach ever had, because this wasn't just a fight, it was my life. That phone call was the breakthrough I'd been hoping for. With Elise's evidence combined with Walter's documentation and my own research, we finally had enough ammunition to destroy Marla's entire operation. But first, I had to survive her final desperate attempt to crush me before I could expose her crimes. The anonymous call I received that Thursday night came from one of the families Marla had forced out of Pine Valley Estates the previous year. "Mr. Reynolds, you don't know me, but I heard through mutual friends that you're dealing with Marla Jennings," the caller said. "My name is David Chen, and she destroyed my family's life with the exact same tactics she's using on you. We had to sell our house for $30,000 below market value just to escape her harassment, but I kept every document, every email, every recorded phone call from that nightmare. If you're really planning to fight back, I have evidence that could help you bury her for good." I met David at a restaurant the next morning, and what he showed me was even worse than I'd imagined. Marla had targeted his family because they'd installed solar panels without getting HOA approval first, even though solar panels were explicitly allowed under state law and couldn't be prohibited by homeowner associations. She'd manufactured violations, forged inspection reports, and even convinced some neighbors to file false complaints about the Chen family, creating distress and property value issues. The harassment had gotten so bad that their teenage daughter was having panic attacks about coming home from school, afraid of what new crisis would be waiting for them. Armed with David's evidence and Elise's insider information, I moved like it was a Black Ops mission. 5:30 a.m., fog low, not a soul outside. My trunk opened like a weapons cache, except it held justice in bold red letters. I parked under cover of dawn mist, pulled out the thick metal sign, red block letters screaming, "OA is a trespasser built on public land." I slapped that sign on the clubhouse wall like I was tagging a crime scene, industrial adhesive. Once it cured, that thing wasn't going anywhere, not without a blowtorch and a warrant. One went dead center. HOA is a trespasser built on public land. I snapped photos, logged GPS, and left before sunrise. The message was simple and unignorable. If Marla wanted to challenge this in court, she'd find out that a cybersecurity expert knows how to create an evidence trail that would satisfy any judge in the country. By 7:30 that morning, my phone was ringing at 7:30 sharp, my phone lit up like Christmas. Marla, screeching, sputtering, swearing I'd be sued, arrested, maybe exiled. I let her rant. Then I hit her with the best line I had. "Feel free to call the cops." "You have no right to post those lies on our clubhouse," she shrieked. "I'm calling the police right now, and you're going to be arrested for vandalism and trespassing." I calmly explained that everything I'd posted was factually accurate information placed on public property, which was completely within my First Amendment rights. "Feel free to call the authorities, Mrs. Jennings," I said with the same professional tone I use when briefing government officials. "I'm confident they'll find everything I've done is perfectly legal." When Officer Martinez arrived an hour later, Marla was already trying to tear down my signs with her fake fingernails, but the industrial adhesive I'd used was designed for outdoor government installations and wasn't going anywhere without professional removal equipment. She presented her case to the officer like she was the victim of some terrible crime, pointing dramatically at my signs and demanding my immediate arrest for vandalism and harassment. But when Officer Martinez examined my documentation and asked Marla to provide proof that the clubhouse was legally constructed on private property, her whole performance fell apart. "Ma'am, these signs contain factual statements about public records," Officer Martinez explained patiently. "The gentleman has every right to post this information on public property, and, according to the county zoning office, there are indeed outstanding violations against this building. If you have concerns about the accuracy of these statements, you'll need to take that up with the county, not the police department." Marla's face turned bright red as she realized that her intimidation tactics had not only failed, but had actually backfired by bringing official attention to her illegal clubhouse. The community reaction was immediate and intense. Neighbors who had been afraid to speak up against Marla for years suddenly found their voices, sharing stories of harassment, manufactured violations, and financial irregularities they'd witnessed, but been too intimidated to report. Word spread through the development like wildfire, and by evening, cars were driving slowly past the clubhouse just to read my signs and take pictures. Several residents called me directly to offer support and share their own horror stories about Marla's reign of terror. But Marla wasn't finished with me yet. That afternoon, I received a certified letter from Jennings Legal Services, which turned out to be some budget attorney she'd hired to threaten me with defamation and harassment lawsuits. The letter demanded that I remove my signs within 24 hours or face legal action that would result in significant financial damages and potential criminal charges. I had to laugh at the amateur hour intimidation tactics. After dealing with hostile foreign governments trying to hack classified systems, a small-town HOA dictator with a cheap lawyer was about as threatening as a strongly worded email from a Nigerian prince. Little did Marla know, I was already 3 steps ahead of her, and her desperate legal threats were about to blow up in her face in the most spectacular way possible. Walter Graham connected me with a young attorney named Sarah Mitchell who specialized in HOA disputes and had a particular passion for taking down corrupt board members. When we met at her office, I brought boxes of evidence that Walter and I had collected, plus David Chen's documentation from his family's ordeal, and the smoking gun materials that Elise had secretly copied from Marla's files. Sarah's eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas morning as she reviewed the financial records, forged documents, and email trails that painted a picture of systematic fraud and abuse of power. Clayton, what you've uncovered here goes way beyond typical HOA overreach, Sarah explained as she organized the evidence into neat stacks. We're looking at potential criminal charges for embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. Marla has created a criminal enterprise disguised as community management, and she's been operating it for years without anyone having the resources or knowledge to stop her. Sarah was confident that we had enough evidence to not only shut down Marla's operation, but also recover the stolen funds and potentially send her to prison. Meanwhile, Marla's budget attorney was having the worst week of his career. When he actually reviewed the evidence I'd presented and researched the applicable laws, he realized that his client had hired him to defend the indefensible. During our meeting at his office, he spent most of the time trying to convince Marla to settle the dispute quietly rather than face the public humiliation and criminal exposure that a court battle would bring. Mrs. Jennings, your position is legally untenable, he kept repeating. Mr. Reynolds has documented evidence of serious misconduct, and if this goes to trial, the consequences could be severe. But Marla was too consumed by rage and wounded pride to listen to reason. She fired her attorney on the spot and declared that she would represent herself in court, confident that her years of bullying residents had given her all the legal expertise she needed. What followed was the most intensive harassment campaign I'd ever experienced, even counting some pretty nasty cyber attacks I'd dealt with in government work. Marla called every city department she could think of, filing false reports about noise violations, fire hazards, health code violations, and even claiming that my cabin was being used for suspicious activities that required investigation. The beautiful thing about having government security clearance is that you learn how to document everything and create unshakable evidence trails. Every phone call Marla made, every false report she filed, every attempt at intimidation was carefully recorded and cross-referenced with timestamps and digital footprints. When the various city departments realized they were being manipulated by someone filing obviously false complaints, they started forwarding Marla's reports directly to me as evidence for my counter-lawsuit. She was essentially building my case for me while thinking she was destroying my life. The breaking point came when Elise Newman finally gathered enough courage to meet with me and Sarah in person. She walked into Sarah's office looking like she hadn't slept in weeks, her hands shaking as she placed a USB drive on the conference table. I can't live with this anymore, she said quietly. Marla forced me to alter financial records, create fake violation notices, and even threatened my job when I questioned some of her more extreme demands. I've been keeping copies of everything as insurance, but I'm scared she'll destroy my life if she finds out I'm cooperating with you. The contents of Elise's USB drive were absolutely devastating. We found email exchanges where Marla explicitly instructed Elise to forge violation notices for residents who had never actually violated any rules. Bank records showed $18,000 in HOA funds diverted to pay for Marla's personal home renovations, disguised as clubhouse maintenance and community improvement projects. Most damning of all were recorded phone conversations where Marla discussed her strategy for forcing undesirable residents to sell their homes so that more appropriate buyers could purchase them at below-market prices. With this evidence in hand, Sarah filed a comprehensive lawsuit against Marla and the HOA board, while simultaneously forwarding copies of the financial crimes evidence to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution. But Marla, completely unaware that her former ally had turned against her, was planning one final, desperate gambit to destroy me before I could expose her crime. She called an emergency HOA meeting for the following Thursday evening, ostensibly to address the ongoing disruption and threat to community safety posed by Clayton Reynolds and his associates. The meeting notice that went out to all residents painted me as some kind of dangerous radical who was threatening the safety and property values of Pine Valley Estates. Marla's propaganda described my signs as defamatory attacks on community leadership, and my refusal to comply with violations as anarchistic behavior that threatens the foundation of civilized neighborhood living. She was clearly planning to use the meeting to drum up community support for having me banned from all common areas, and possibly even forced to sell my cabin. What she didn't realize was that I was planning to use that same meeting to expose her crimes in front of the entire community, armed with evidence that would destroy her credibility so completely that even her most loyal supporters would abandon her. The stage was set for the most dramatic community meeting in Pine Valley Estates history, and only one of us was going to walk away from it intact. The night before the emergency meeting, Walter Graham called me with one final piece of the puzzle that explained everything about Marla's behavior and tactics. "Clayton, I did some digging into Marla's background, and what I found is disturbing," he said. "She has a sister in Arizona who was involved in a nearly identical HOA corruption scandal 3 years ago. Same tactics, same financial fraud, same pattern of harassment and intimidation. The sister had to relocate when things got too hot, and it looks like Marla learned the playbook from her family's previous operation. This isn't her first rodeo, son. She's a professional at this kind of systematic abuse." I arrived at the community center early, bringing my laptop, a portable projector, and carefully organized evidence folders that contained enough documentation to bury Marla's operation 10 times over. The meeting room was packed beyond capacity, with residents standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. I could see that Marla had rallied her core group of supporters, but there were also a lot of faces I didn't recognize, people who had apparently come to see what all the controversy was about. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, and I could feel dozens of eyes watching my every move as I set up my equipment in the back corner. Marla opened with her standard performance. Dramatic gestures, buzzwords about community harmony and property values, the same recycled complaints about my anarchistic behavior that she'd been pushing for months. She painted me as a dangerous outsider threatening Pine Valley Estates' peaceful way of life, showing photos of my signs with theatrical commentary about attacks on civilized neighborhood living. The whole presentation was predictable, repetitive, and designed more to work the crowd into an emotional frenzy than to present actual facts. By the time she concluded with her formal proposal to ban me from common areas and force the sale of my cabin, a significant portion of the crowd was looking at me like I was some kind of domestic terrorist who needed immediate removal. But then I stood up and requested 30 minutes to respond to the allegations, and everything changed. "Thank you, Mrs. Jennings, for that very interesting presentation," I began, connecting my laptop to the projector with the calm professionalism I'd learned from years of briefing government officials. The room dimmed. I clicked the first slide. On the wall, HOA bank records with $18,042, Clubhouse decking, circled in red. Then came the photos, her kitchen, her marble countertops. "Paid by you," I said, voice steady as the projector fan hummed behind me. The shift was immediate and visceral. Murmurs rippled through the crowd like a physical wave. I watched faces change, confusion melting into recognition, then hardening into anger. A woman in the third row leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "Wait, that's the same granite pattern I saw in her kitchen at the holiday party." The man beside her nodded grimly. "I helped approve that Clubhouse budget. That money was supposed to fix the deck, not buy countertop." The crowd's energy transformed completely. Where moments before they had been prepared to lynch me, now they were staring at Marla with growing suspicion and outrage. I had their attention, their trust, and their hunger for truth. This was the moment I'd been preparing for since the day she first knocked on my door. I presented the email trails proving she had directed the creation of fake violation notices, the recorded phone conversations where she discussed manipulating property sales for personal profit, and the county records confirming that the clubhouse had been built illegally on public land without proper permits. Each piece of evidence built on the previous one, creating an unshakable foundation of documented corruption that even Marla's most loyal supporters couldn't ignore or explain away. Then I hit play. Marla's voice filled the room, casually plotting how to push undesirable residents out. Her words, not mine. The crowd went dead silent. A woman in the back of the room stood suddenly. "That's my house," she shouted, pointing to a slide showing a forged violation notice. "That's my name on that letter. You said my garden gnomes were a safety hazard." Laughter broke through the tension, short and bitter. Someone else yelled, "You made me sell my house for pennies, Marla." And just like that, the room turned. People started sharing their own stories of harassment, manufactured violations, and suspicious financial irregularities they'd witnessed but been too intimidated to report. The mood shifted completely as residents realized they'd been victims of a systematic fraud operation disguised as community management. Marla's response to the evidence was even more damaging than the evidence itself. Instead of offering explanations or attempting to defend her actions, she launched into a series of personal attacks against me, Walter, and anyone else who had supported my investigation. She accused me of fabricating documents, claimed that Walter was jealous of her leadership success, and suggested that the entire presentation was part of some elaborate conspiracy to destroy Pine Valley Estates from within. Her desperate, increasingly unhinged responses only convinced more residents that everything I'd presented was absolutely true. The final nail in Marla's coffin came when something extraordinary happened. The room fell completely silent. Not the expectant quiet of people waiting for the next speaker, but the profound hush that comes when everyone collectively holds their breath. In that silence, a single chair creaked. All eyes turned toward the sound. Elise Newman sat in the middle section, her hands gripping the sides of her folding chair so tightly her knuckles had gone white. For a long moment, she didn't move. She just stared straight ahead at the projection screen where the evidence of her own complicity was displayed for everyone to see. Her face was pale, almost ghostly in the dim light, and I could see her chest rising and falling with the rapid breathing of someone fighting an internal battle. The silence stretched on. 30 seconds. A minute. Someone coughed nervously, but no one spoke. It was as if the entire room understood that something pivotal was about to happen, and no one wanted to break the spell. Then, slowly, agonizingly slowly, Elise began to rise from her chair. It looked like she was fighting against gravity itself, or perhaps against years of accumulated fear and shame. Her legs trembled slightly as she stood, and she had to steady herself with one hand on the chair back. When she finally reached her full height, she turned to face Marla for the first time during the entire meeting. "I stayed silent for too long," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying clearly through the dead quiet room. "I let fear excuse everything, but that fear turned into shame, and I couldn't live with it anymore." She paused, swallowed hard, and when she spoke again, her voice was stronger. "I helped you hurt people, but tonight I helped stop you. Every time I click print on one of those fake violation notices," Elise continued, her voice cracking, "I told myself it was just a job, that I needed the paycheck, that it wasn't my responsibility." She took a deep breath. "But when my own son asked why I looked so sad coming home from work, I couldn't lie to him. That was the moment I realized I'd become part of the machine I hated." She turned to the crowd. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want this to stop, for all of us." When the vote came, it wasn't close. Marla was out. The room didn't cheer. They exhaled, like people waking from a nightmare. 52 residents voted for her immediate removal, with only 3 votes in her favor, including her own. The motion to pursue legal action for recovery of stolen funds passed unanimously, and the motion to restructure the HOA with proper oversight and transparency also passed by an overwhelming margin. All charges against me were formally dropped, and I received multiple apologies from residents who admitted they'd been manipulated by Marla's lies and intimidation tactics. Her final walkout wasn't loud. No screams, no threats, just a tight jaw and a silence full of defeat. Pine Valley didn't just remove her, they erased her. She left screaming threats about lawsuits and revenge, but everyone in that room knew that her reign of terror was finally over. As I packed up my equipment and accepted congratulations from neighbors who had found the courage to speak out against corruption, I felt a satisfaction deeper than any successful cybersecurity operation I'd ever completed. Justice had been served, truth had prevailed, and a community had been freed from the grip of a tyrant who had thought she was untouchable. 6 months after Marla's dramatic exit, I received an anonymous email that made me realize her reign of terror in Pine Valley Estates had been just one chapter in a much longer pattern of community manipulation and abuse. The email contained a video file that showed a disturbingly familiar figure conducting what appeared to be a compliance inspection in another housing development, this time in Nevada. There was Marla, wearing the same fake jewelry and carrying the same clipboard, harassing new victims with the same tactics she had used against me and my neighbors. The email also included contact information for residents in her new community who were beginning to experience the familiar pattern of manufactured violations, harassment campaigns, and financial irregularities that we had endured in Pine Valley Estates. They were looking for help, guidance, and evidence that could be used to stop her before she destroyed another community, the way she had tried to destroy ours. But one thing in that email caught my eye, a name on the Nevada board roster, Jessica Jennings, new HOA president. Same fake smile, different town, same bloodline. And unlike Marla, Jessica had a law degree. Looks like this time the game might get smarter and dirtier. I faced a difficult decision: get involved in another exhausting battle against Marla's corruption, or focus on maintaining the peaceful life I had worked so hard to reclaim. After careful consideration, I chose a middle path that felt right for both my conscience and my desire for continued peace. Instead of directly inserting myself into the Nevada situation, I sent a comprehensive evidence package to the residents who had contacted me, including all the documentation from our Pine Valley Estates case, legal strategies that had proven effective, and contact information for attorneys who specialized in HOA corruption cases. I empowered them to fight their own battle with the knowledge and resources that we had developed through our own painful experience. The follow-up email I received 2 months later brought news that made all the stress and conflict worthwhile. The Nevada residents had successfully exposed both Marla and Jessica's operation, with criminal charges filed and the entire HOA board removed from power. The evidence I had provided, combined with their own investigation, had created an airtight case that neither sister could escape or manipulate their way out of. Justice, it seemed, had a way of following corruption wherever it tried to hide. In the immediate aftermath of Marla's original departure from Pine Valley Estates, her house had gone dark that very night, and by morning a moving truck was loading her possessions, while she sat in her car wearing dark sunglasses like some kind of disgraced celebrity fleeing a scandal. She left behind a mountain of HOA debt, numerous legal liabilities, and a community that was finally free to operate without fear of her arbitrary rules and vindictive enforcement. The transformation was remarkable. Walter became president and Elise found redemption as secretary, together eliminating the arbitrary rules and restructuring finances with proper oversight. The legal consequences continued to unfold long after she fled. The district attorney's office pursued criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud, though the case was complicated by her disappearance and jurisdictional issues. The civil lawsuit resulted in a significant judgment that would follow her wherever she tried to establish herself, and her professional reputation was so thoroughly destroyed that she would never again be able to manipulate homeowner associations with the same level of success, at least not until she tried. As for me, I briefly considered accepting offers to serve on the new HOA board, but ultimately decided that my contribution had been to expose the corruption, not to become part of the ongoing governance structure. For a while I thought maybe I should run, join the board, be part of the solution. But I realized something else. I'm not built for politics. I'm built for firewalls, not front yards. And maybe that's okay. Maybe knowing when to walk away is just as important as knowing when to stand up. I was much happier returning to my quiet life of remote cybersecurity work, morning coffee on my cabin porch, and peaceful evenings by the lake. My freedom tree became something of a local landmark, an oak sapling planted in my front yard with a small plaque reading, "In memory of common sense, may it never be forgotten again." Someone left a small wooden sign beside it last week. "We see you." No name, no note, just those 3 words, nailed into the soil like a promise. The cabin that had started as my private retreat became a symbol of resistance against petty tyranny, and I was proud of the role it had played in our community's liberation. The HOA is a trespasser sign hangs in my home office as a reminder that sometimes the quiet guy who just wants to be left alone turns out to be the most dangerous enemy a bully can make. As I finish telling the story, I'm sitting on my cabin porch with my morning coffee, watching the sun rise over the lake that attracted me to Pine Valley Estates in the first place. The Freedom Tree has grown significantly in the past year, and its branches now provide shade for the bench where neighbors sometimes stop to chat about community issues, local politics, or just the simple pleasure of living in a place where people treat each other with respect and fairness. Sometimes in life, you encounter people who believe that a small amount of power gives them the right to control and manipulate everyone around them. Marla Jennings thought she could intimidate me into submission through harassment, manufactured violations, and systematic abuse of her position. What she never could have anticipated was that some people know how to research, document, and fight back using the same systematic approach that protects national security systems from sophisticated attacks. I learned that community strength comes from transparency, accountability, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when standing up requires more effort than most people want to invest. Sometimes winning isn't about revenge or personal satisfaction. It's about making sure that bullies can't continue hurting innocent people who just want to live their lives in peace. And if you're listening to this story while dealing with your own HOA nightmare, remember that documentation, evidence, and community support can overcome even the most entrenched corruption. The truth has a way of protecting itself, and when you stand on the side of truth, you'll find that other people will stand with you. Comment below where you're listening from, and let me know if you've ever dealt with your own HOA horror story. Until next time, keep your coffee strong and your documentation stronger, because you never know when you might need to fight for your right to live peacefully in your own home.